This lecture is on the contemporary philosopher John Rawls. Rawls was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1921 and died in 2002. He taught for more than 30 years at Harvard and was a social contract theorist. Social contract theory is that view we've been talking about, where our moral or political obligations come about through the consent of the community. Rawls' most discussed work is Justice is Fairness, where he talks about his theory of a just liberal society, published in 1973. Rawls discusses the issue of establishing legitimate law. The need to impose a unified law on a diverse population raises significant issues. How can it be legitimate to coerce all citizens to follow just one law, given that citizens will inevitably hold to quite different worldviews? Why should a citizen willingly obey the law if it is imposed on him by people with different beliefs and values than his own? Rawls' principle of legitimacy is the test for acceptable use of political power in a democracy. According to this principle, political power may only be used in ways that all citizens can reasonably expect it to endorse, or all citizens can reasonably accept the enforcement of a particular set of basic laws. Those coerced by laws they dislike can still be able to endorse the society's fundamental governmental arrangements. There must be a constitution where citizens will honor these rules even when this means sacrificing their own self-interests. Acceptable use of political power comes from reasonable citizens who have their own views on God, life, right, and wrong, but are unwilling to impose their doctrine on others and force them to live according to their beliefs, even if they belong to a majority that can enforce their beliefs on everyone. Acceptable use of political power comes from ideas that citizens are free and equal, and society should be a fair system of cooperation. Acceptable use of political power is aimed towards fair opportunities for all citizens, especially in education and training, a decent distribution of income and wealth, government is the employer of last resort, basic health care for all citizens, and public financing of elections. To develop Rawls' understanding of the role of government, let's compare John Locke with John Rawls. Both Locke and Rawls present theories of justice based on liberal principles of equality, freedom, and individual rights. Both are social contract theorists, where legitimate authority of the government comes from consent of the governed. Locke and Rawls differ on the source of rights and the role government has in securing justice. Locke sees rights deriving from self-ownership. No one has a claim on our bodies and possessions other than ourselves. The task of government is to protect our property. This is in contrast with Rawls, who sees what we have as completely arbitrary. None of what we have is ours, but is the result of an arbitrary genetic lottery by which we are the beneficiaries. The reason I have what I have is good genes and luck from a favorable environment. Thus, I am not the possessor of my talents, capacities, and abilities, but merely the recipient of them. Locke holds that what a person does with his or her belongs belongs exclusively to them. No one has a right to interfere with the product of their labor. For Rawls, since what we have is never truly ours to begin with, what we have is shared by society as a whole and should be distributed to society as a whole. This conception underwrites his theory of distributive justice. Rawls doesn't subscribe to what we see in Locke, where the one who produces the object should possess it. While Locke emphasizes liberty, Rawls emphasizes equality in his political worldview. The guiding principles of Rawls' understanding of justice as fairness are given institutional form by its two principles of justice. The first is, each person is to have equal rights to liberties. All citizens should have basic rights and liberties: liberty of conscience, freedom of association, freedom of speech, the right to vote, etc. And the the second, social and economic inequalities are to satisfy two conditions. One, there still has to be offices and positions open to all under fair equality of opportunity. Citizens should have the same education and economic opportunities regardless of whether they were born rich or poor. The state should also guarantee both basic minimum income and health care for all. Rawls is adamant that unless there are public funds for elections, restrictions on campaign contributions, and substantially less access to the media, politics will be captured by concentrations of private economic power. This will make it impossible for equally able citizens to have equal opportunities to influence politics, regardless of their wealth. And the second is that economic inequalities are to be to the benefit of the least advantaged members of society. This is known as the difference principle. Goods should be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution works to everyone's advantage. Those who are lucky enough to be born with more should not get richer at the expense of those who are less fortunate. Those better endowed are welcome to use their gifts to make themselves wealthier, so long as their doing so also contributes to the good of those less endowed. We are able to figure out if someone receiving more good works to everyone's advantage by focusing on those who are worst off, because if you're the worst off and you support a particular unequal distribution, then everyone else will affirm it too. This is based on Rawls' belief that it is permissible for the government to distribute goods because people don't truly deserve what they have, even if they worked for it. A citizen should not merit more simply because he was lucky enough to be born with the potential to develop skills that are currently in high demand. Rawls invokes a state of nature theory to demonstrate the nature of justice. He appeals to what free, equal, and reasonable people would agree to in a hypothetical thought experiment before the existence of government. The original position is an imaginary situation in which each real citizen has a representative, and all these representatives come to an agreement on which principles of justice should order the government of the citizens. Each representative wants only what free and equal citizens want, and each representative tries to agree to principles for the basic structure that are situated fairly with other representatives. The most striking feature of the original position is what's called the veil of ignorance. Each representative is deprived of knowledge of the race, ethnicity, class, natural endowments, intelligence, age, income, religion, political affiliation, gender, and so much more of the real citizen that they represent. The representatives are also ignorant of much of the society that the real-life citizens will inhabit, other than that it is not overly rich or overly poor. Citizens in the society make up a diverse group holding to many different ways of life, and that citizens have interest in an abundance of rights and liberties. The representatives are not going to have the kind of knowledge to bias things in the citizen they're representing's own direction. Thus, the representative would need to structure society in a way that the citizen being represented will benefit, no matter who he or she turns out to be, whether religious, atheist, rich, poor, old, young, male, female, etc. The representative isn't going to try to bias the society in favor of men making more than women if it's likely that the citizen they're representing ends up being a woman. The representative isn't going to try to abolish all religion if the citizen they represent may end up being religious. The representative isn't going to try to have theocratic laws where everyone must convert to the state religion because the citizen being represented may end up being an atheist. Thus, the way to go is to support principles for the society that offer freedom both for the religious person to worship and for the unbeliever to be free from coercion to worship. The key for the representative is to promote legislation that everyone, even the most adversely affected citizen in the society, would be in favor of. No representative can press for principles that will arbitrarily favor the citizen they represent because no one knows the specific attributes of the citizen that they represent. Thus, the representatives will press for legislation that is fair to all citizens and would be endorsed by all citizens. The authority of the government is justified if our government is the kind of government we would choose in the original position.